Today is April 3rd, 2015. I'm Adrienne Falaise, and it is my honor to be interviewing Judith Light for the Archive of American Television here in New York City, New York. Thank you so much for joining us today, Judith.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to start with about 10 minutes of background information.
Okay.
What was your name at birth?
Judith Ellen Light,
And when and where were you born?
Trenton, New Jersey,
And when?
February 9th. 9th? Do we want to go there?
If you want to go there, we're willing to go there.
February 9th, 1949.
Fantastic. And did you grow up in Trenton as
I
well?
did.
And what were your parents' names and what did they do for a living?
Sidney Light. My dad was in the fruit and produce business, and then he became an accountant in the Hunts Point market. And my mother was a model and a women's wear buyer. And her name was, well, actually, this is a funny story. My mother's so funny. Her name at birth was Pearl Light. And so I asked her twin sister Bernice, I said, why does she go by Sue? Because she would say that her middle name was Sue. Well, that was not true. I found out later. But she just took that name because she liked it, and she never legalized it. So she was always known as Sue Light.
What traits do you think you inherited from your parents?
Oh, my God. My parents were phenomenal people. From my father, who used to get up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to go to the produce market, so that they delivered fruit and produce to institutions like hospitals and schools and places like that. So he would get up at 2 or 3 in the morning to go to the produce market. And I learned a kind of discipline from him that you did whatever it took to make you a successful person, a person who was disciplined, and a person who was there to, in some way, serve other people. And he was a very funny man and a very generous man. My mother was the kind of person who was literally there to make me be the best person that I could possibly be. So her traits were also hardworking, thinking about other people, making sure that the way you were going through the world was authentic and genuine and kind. And that was my father's, a lot of aspect of my father as well. But to always be thinking about how you were being received by other people and what you were giving to other people. And I think many of the qualities that my parents both had were those qualities that they matched in each other and that they kept giving to me. And my mother was a very, very powerful woman. I mean, this was a time when my mother was a working person when that wasn't necessarily the norm. But she would always be there for me when I came home from school. And then my father would come home, he would eat dinner, and then he would have to go to sleep because he started the next morning at work. And so there was this kind of work ethic that I inherited from them that I treasure to this day.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any siblings?
I don't.
What were some of your interests when you were little?
Acting.
How soon did you
And
become
acting.
interested?
And acting.
So from a very young age?
Yeah, 3 years old.
Oh, wow.
My mother helped me memorize "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," and I performed it for my father. And I still remember the moment that when I was doing it, he started to cry. And I ran to him afterwards, and I had the thought, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. Now, as we will go further in this interview, you will find out that Herb Hampshire, who has been my manager for 35 years, it took him a long time to get me away from this child who had this desire to act, to be a grown-up, who was actually a real professional in the business, who could actually be successful in a way that I always really wanted to be. But it was that moment in time that was so special that that lives in me today. I just don't come from that anymore. I come from a very different place.
Okay, we'll definitely get into all that.
Yes, we will.
So did you do school plays and things like
I
that?
did
then?
every school play you could possibly imagine. I was trying to find my kindergarten report card where Mrs. Bergen said, it seems that Judy, which is how I was known, has some aptitude for acting. So it was really early on. And then in first grade, oh my goodness, first grade teacher, Miss DiMatteo? We're going back so far. Anyway, I wrote a play called Shy Violet, and I played Shy Violet. Can you possibly imagine the hubris of that? And I wrote this whole thing about all these flowers, and I think that's the first and only play that I ever wrote. And of course, my mother made all the hats for all the flowers. I mean, it was a very participatory thing. My parents, I think, both wanted to be performers. And they knew that life wasn't going to, their lives were not going to be such that they could do that. And so, of course, they funneled everything into me.
Did you watch a lot of television growing up?
Not really. Mm-mm. No, I mean, Sunday night, Disney specials, things like that. But no, I mean, some here and there, but it wasn't a real focus. I mean, one of the things that was very important to my parents was my education. And they believed very strongly that I had to have a way of moving through the world that should the acting thing not work out, and that was always a concern, and it should be a concern for people, that I always had something to fall back on, that I would be able to have a really valid and important education. And that's why I went to Carnegie Mellon University, because I was able to study some liberal arts courses as well as my acting work. So that was something that was always very important. So I wasn't really watching television. I was studying, or I was going to acting classes or dancing classes or piano. I mean, there was always something that I was doing that took up my time in a different way. And that, again, came from my parents.
So growing up in New Jersey, did you come into the city to go to plays and things like that?
Yeah, they took me in, they brought me to plays. Actually, I'm not even sure what they were thinking, and it's really not the psychological profile of my parents. They let me, after I'd been at this performing arts camp, I'd gone to a regular camp, and I was so terrible at sports, and it was like, we were playing volleyball and all this stuff, sleepaway camp, and I was like, this is not for me. I mean, where's the play? Who's doing, Bye Bye Birdie? What are we doing? We're canoeing, and I was like, this is not for me. So they found a performing arts camp in New Hope, Pennsylvania, which is very close to Trenton, and I went there for 2 summers, but I was very, very young. And we'll get into this later, but it was there that I only recognized later how much care the gay community had taken care of me when I was there. And I get very emotional about it, because in the summer, all of these people who were artists and dancers and acting teachers all came to New Hope because they wanted to spend the summer out of the city. And there was a large gay community. And because I was so little, they just always watched out for me, and I didn't realize that until later. And so they sent me to my parents sent me to this performing arts camp for the summer called Ramblerny. No idea what that meant. And this gorgeous mansion with an amphitheater. I mean, I was 12 and doing, the chorus in Antigone. And then there was this wonderful acting teacher, and they let me go on the train by myself to New York when I was 13 to go into the city to take acting lessons. I mean, I don't know what possessed them. I guess because I had a boyfriend whose parents were in the city and I could go and stay with them or something. I have no idea. And of course, they're no longer with us. My parents passed away. It's coming up now 5 years for my mother in April and 3 years for my dad. And I can't ask them anymore what possessed them to let this 13-year-old girl go on the train by herself to New York. But anyway, they did, and I'm grateful.
Yeah. So then you went to Carnegie Mellon and studied acting.
Right, I did. Well, actually, what happened was I went to a girls' private school in Burlington, New Jersey, and there was this extraordinary woman there whose name was Ruth Strand, and she was one of my early mentors. And my mother had found her. That was my mother. She was very committed to finding people that would be able to support me and coach me. And when I was in Trenton, I went to a junior high school called Junior 3, and there were oratorical contests, and Ruth Strand coached me in the oratorical contest, and I won. And one year I tied with my friend Amy Robinson, who is now a film producer, and who I'm still in touch with. And so Ruth was the head of the drama department there, and I went to St. Mary's Hall. And she really took me under her wing. And during my junior year, she said, there is a program at Carnegie Mellon that I think you should go to for the summer. And she said, let's apply. And I did, and I got in, and I loved it. And I applied there for college, and that's how I came to go to CMU. And that program, in the brochure, it says, this program is as rigorous and exacting as theater itself. And they were not kidding. Because for 2 years, you weren't even allowed to be on the main stage. You had to do crew, you had to learn how to make costumes, you had to learn how to make props. And it was very taxing, but an incredible, incredible education. So that's how I came to be there.
Were you drawn to anything else besides acting and all those other
No.
roles that you were doing?
No, you know, what always filled in around it were things like art and music and things that added, and history and English literature and psychology. Those are all the things that came into play that were interests of mine because of the acting. There was always an expansion of it. It wasn't just the acting for the acting's sake. It was about all these other things that could fill in these characters that I had the opportunity to portray.
Mm-hmm. So what did you do upon graduating from there?
Well, there was this program that they had, a theater communications group, TCGs, had this audition, and you had preliminaries that you went to, and you were coached at Carnegie almost all year for these auditions. And I went to the preliminaries in New York, and I met an extraordinary woman named Rosemary Tischler, who also took me under her wing. And then I made it to the finals in Chicago. And at the finals in Chicago, all the artistic directors from all of the repertory theaters all over the country are there.
Wow.
And they give you a list of people when you're finished that want to see you, and you have 2 monologues that you do. One was a classic, and one had to be a classic, one had to be a modern, one had to be a drama, one had to be a comedy. And I did a comedy. I did Viola in Twelfth Night. I did the Ring speech. And for those of you who are well-schooled, you will know what that is. And for my modern, I did a piece from Joe Egg. I did a monologue from this play, Joe Egg. And at the end of the time, they give you a list of all these people, or not all these people, that actually want to talk to you about possibly coming to their company for the following year, for the following season. And I was very fortunate. I had a lot of people that wanted to talk to me. And Milwaukee Repertory Theater was giving me the best offer. And so I chose to go there. And that's where I went after I left Carnegie. And I was there for 2 seasons. One season was with the artistic director, Ton Chiolman, who actually left after that. He retired. And then the next year, a man named Nagel Jackson took over. And he kept me on in the company. And he was formulating what he thought would be this brand new company that would get national attention. And in fact, it did. And that was when I met my friend Jeffrey Tambor, and we started working together. And so when I finished that season, Nagel called me into his office, and he said to me, "You're going to stay here forever unless you get out of here." He said, "I will bring you back." He said, "But you are never going to expand or grow into the actor that you can actually be if you don't get out of here." And he said, "I want you to get out, and I want you to go to every single piece of theater that you can possibly see." And I took his advice, and I did, and I saw everything. And to this day, I see everything. He said, "You have to study other people's work. You have to watch what other people are doing." And he was another person who took me under his wing. There was this kind of narrowness that I think I had in my life and my career because I was so single-minded. And that people saw that that wasn't going to serve me. And so I went off and I went to the Seattle rep because they were another company that had offered me something for their season, but it wasn't as good as Milwaukee. So I went to Seattle and I did a season there. And I was there for about a year and a half. I worked at a couple of other theaters, and then Nagel brought me back. And I went back, and then I called Rosemary Tischler in New York at the end of that time. And I said, Ro, is it time for me to leave repertory theater? And because I was getting to play all these different roles, is it time for me to come to New York? And she said, it's time for you to come to New York. And when I came to New York, she was so generous. She gave me the part of the maid in my first Broadway show, which was The Doll's House, with Liv Ullmann and Sam Waterston. And it was magic. Mm-hmm. And I thought that that was the way it was always going to go. And we will talk about how it didn't always go that way.
So let's go there. What happened after that?
Well, then after that, I did another Broadway show that was a play called Herzl, about Theodor Herzl and the Zionist movement, which was a play that was written off of the book by Amos Elon, which was called Herzl. And it was produced by a movie producer from MGM, Dory Sherry. And we did it at the Palace Theater. And it was kind of extraordinary because I was living in New York and I was sitting on the bus and I was reading Backstage magazine. And I fought to get an agent. I was really scrappy. And there was a woman named Judy Shane at Brett Adams, and I went in to meet her and I said, I need an agent and I want you to be my agent. And she said, well, let's just test it out for a little while. But anyway, I was on the bus and I'm reading this thing in Backstage magazine, and it's a breakdown of the character that I played. It was Theodore Herzl's wife. And I said, that's my part. That's my part. And so I said to Judy Shane, I said, get me in for this audition. She said, they don't want to see you. They don't know who you are. They don't care. And I said, just get me in. If you get me in, I think I can get this part. And finally, Shirley Rich, who was a great casting director in New York, finally said she would see me. And I went in and I did the audition. And she said, oh my. And I met the director, Jay Ranelli, who is still a friend of mine to this day, and I got the part. And it was with Paul Hecht and this great company of actors, and it lasted for 5 minutes. And I was devastated. It was just, I said, no, this is not what this is supposed to happen. I'm supposed to, this is supposed to be the career. This is supposed to be going. What's happening? And then I didn't work for a while. And then I went up to Canada and I did Blanche in Streetcar. And then wait a minute, let me get the choreography of this correct, the chronology. I was working intermittently. I did a production of The Seagull for a woman named Eugenia Leontovich, who knew Anton Chekhov and was kind of this hero in the acting community. And so we did that production, and it was at some small church on 76th Street, and it was difficult. And one of the things that was happening for me was that there are two things. One is that at a certain level, I always knew what I wanted, but I had this demand that it happened the way that I wanted it to happen, as opposed to allowing things to happen, as allowing a kind of graciousness and a kind of understanding of the world and how the business works and how one can actually be in the world and how one can actually be in this world of this work that we do. Mm-hmm. So I was fraught, angry, upset, and I was also being a spoiled brat because I wanted it the way I wanted it, the way I had pictured it, that it was going to be, I was going to do feature films and I was going to do theater, and that was what I was going to do. And it wasn't working out that way. So the less I worked, the more agitated I got. And finally I went to the O'Neill Foundation for one summer up in Waterford, Connecticut. I did several plays, and it was an amazing time. And I loved it. So I was working enough to sort of keep me going, and I did the first reading with this extraordinary group of women of Wendy Wasserstein's play Uncommon Women and Others. And then I came back to New York, and I really was at a breaking point because I didn't know. I kept thinking, am I just going to go from play to play and job to job? And I always knew that at some other deeper level that I wanted to make a difference in some way in the world, because I saw in the world how divisive things were and how complicated and upsetting, and how people went through the world being terribly unhappy. And I wanted to find a way to make a difference. I mean, I got involved in things like the Hunger Project because I knew that world hunger was an issue that I wanted to work on. And I saw that, and I knew that if I had some kind of celebrity, that would allow me to do work in the world that I thought would be helpful, that I could somehow make a difference, make a contribution. Because that's what I really wanted to do. I mean, it's like I didn't want to get a big name play or a big name movie just because it was going to be for my ego. I mean, that was certainly part of it, but more importantly to me was, how will I use this to make a difference? And so I was at a near breaking point after I got back from the O'Neill. And I looked at it and I said, I think I want to leave the business. I think I got it. This isn't satisfying. Maybe I should go into psychology. Maybe I should go into law. Maybe I should teach deaf kids, give some other way. And I remember I threw my back out and I was lying on my bed in this tiny apartment in New York, and I went, look, I don't know who's out there. I don't know if there's any of you are out there. If anybody's listening, I surrender. Just use me. I don't know how you want to use me, but just... And the thing I swore when I got to New York, and I was staying with my parents because they were living in Hastings, Yonkers area, and I said to them, look, I am never going to do a soap opera. I am never going to do a sitcom, and that's the way it's going to be. So at this moment, I said, whatever. I have no money. My unemployment is running out. I finally went to see a therapist who was extraordinary, Bill Kennedy. And I said, and I was so overweight. I was like 50 pounds heavier than I am now. And I said, look, I have a couple of issues. You know how you just sort of like barrel through? And I said, I know I have to handle my weight. I'm like really frightened of being in a full-time relationship because I don't think I can do this, and I think I have to do something other than acting. And he was so kind, and he said, look, we'll deal with everything. He said, but don't do anything about the acting. He said, don't leave yet because something is going to happen. He said, don't do anything until you see me next week. And I thought, what is he, psychic? I thought, this is a little weird, okay. And I literally left his office, and those were the days when we had pagers that would go off, and you had a service, and you called your service. I called my service, and they said, your agent called, because by now I had a different agent. And I called them, and she said, they would like to see you for an understudy on a soap opera. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, not even the part on a soap opera. It was like an understudy on a soap opera. It was like, and I said, no. And she said, what are you doing? You don't have any money. She said, it's $350 for the day. I said, I'll take it. I said, I'll go in. And I ended up, it was One Life to Live, and I ended up not going on that day. But I talked to the producer, Joe Stewart, and he said, if you were to get this part, what would you do with this part? And I just started talking about the ideas that I had about the character. And then they asked me to audition with a lot of other women for the part. And they gave me the part.
This is Karen Woloch.
It was Karen Woloch. And it changed my life. Because what I did with it was I said, okay, if this is you, am I supposed to be listening? And I started listening in a different way. And I also looked at it and I said, wait a minute. What you have the potential to do with this is reach millions and millions and millions of people. And when they started talking to me about the story, what the story would be, and I said, they said, this is the story of the movie that Catherine Deneuve did, which was Belle de Jour, which was the woman who was married to a successful man and was a prostitute on the side. And they said, that's what we want to do. We want to do that story. And I said, this could be really interesting. And what ended up happening was they wrote it so magnificently that the character became iconic. They created this character, and we together created this woman that people still remember me for, which is kind of extraordinary to me. And I would get letters when it all came out. There's this one iconic scene that's on the witness
Courtroom
stand.
scene, yeah.
Right. And what was happening for me was that I was beginning to see that I could contribute in the ways that I had always talked about contributing. And one of the other things I said when I was lying on the bed was, if I'm going to just surrender and do what comes my way and listen to what the universe is presenting to me, I'm so arrogant. I said, you better send me help. I said, send help. And right after that, I met Herb Hampshire, my manager of 35 years. And we have this remarkable synergy and connection. And so, and one of the first things I said to him is, if I ever get any kind of notoriety, I want to do something with that in some way. And he said, that I can help you do. He said, if you're not going to be coming from your ego and what you think you want to do all the time, he said, that kind of principled subordination to something higher, larger, bigger than you is something that I am happy to sign on for. And so that began our conversations and our working relationship. And so, for instance, when I would be in the makeup room on One Life to Live, he would come there from Philadelphia, and he had been a practicing therapist. He had a huge practice in Philadelphia, and he was never my therapist, but we would talk about characters from a psychological point of view. And I would say to him, I don't know how to make this line work. Is this the writing or is it me? And he said, it's you. He said, you're standing in your way. He said, you have some idea about what you think you should be doing. And actually what it was about was the way the character would come off in some ways as unlikable. He said, you don't want anybody to think that you're unlikable. He said, so get over it and the line will work. And he was invariably right all the time. And so that was so exciting to me, to be able to work in that way. And so we began to see that people were paying attention to this character. And then I did that scene, which TV Guide then called one of their 100 most powerful, or I don't know what the exact title of it is.
Yeah, it's one of the most memorable moments.
Most memorable moments on
Mm-hmm.
soap operas or television or,
Mm-hmm.
right. And as the character told the truth.
So actually, can we just set the scene a little bit? Like, what was the storyline that was going on? And then
The storyline was that I was being forced into prostitution by an old lover of mine while I was married to the town's lovely, wonderful doctor, Larry Wolick, the fabulous Michael Storm. And I had been found out by a very good friend of mine, and in the story, played by Erica Slezak, who was really wonderful, and she was the only one in town who knew what I was actually doing, and she was my friend, and she protected me. And in order to protect her, because she was being accused of a murder, I had to go on the witness stand. And invariably, it came out that the reason I knew all of these things and how I knew she was innocent was because I was many times in the same place that she was, and so I was with a John, and so I knew. And it required that in this scene that was shot over, the actual most powerful scene that we're talking about was shot in one day in one take. But that, the story happened over a few days in the courtroom. And actually, the storyline actually began a year and a half earlier, where you saw Karen lying to her husband. You saw her dealing with Mark O'Dane, played by Jerry Anthony, dear Jerry Anthony, who's no longer with us, and my sister Bryn Thayer, who is still one of my closest friends, who played my sister Jenny. And so everybody in the town was in this courtroom. But for a year and a half, you saw the story of Karen with her Johns and getting beat up and lying and trying to keep this all a secret from the town. And then there was this one moment where she has to save her friend. And in order to save her friend, she has to sacrifice herself. And she has to, for lack of a better phrase, she has to come out. And I think that's why that scene is so powerful. It's not just the writing, which was gorgeous, or the acting, but the time period of all of those stories that coalesced in this one moment, and that people watching a person end their life as they know it, expose themselves in such a vulnerable and fragile and difficult way, becomes in some form heroic. Because there isn't a person on this earth that doesn't have something to come out about. It's not a question of, and we'll get into this later, why I'm so inspired by the gay community, is because of their courage, what it takes to actually be the authentic person you actually are, what it's like to let go of your lies and your stories and your maneuvering and manipulation through the world, and say, I did this is who I am. And I think that's what made that moment so intensely powerful for people. It was a mythic moment. And so when that happened, subsequently, Karen, supported by Vicky and her sister Jenny, is working to get out of the life. And I received letters from prostitutes that were stunning. It's like, if you can do it, I can do it. And I remember one night I was at, one of those all-night delis in New York, and we had shot late, and I was standing there, and this one woman was standing next to me, and she said, "You're very good as that prostitute on One Life to Live." And I said, "Thank you very much." I said, "How would you know?" And she said, "Would you like me to take you to meet some of the girls?" And she took me to this elegant, beautiful house with all these young girls who were college students and making money to get through school, which was another remarkable experience. All of a sudden, my world was opened up in a way that I had never expected. Had I not been listening, that never would have happened. And so then I got letters from people like this one mother. No, it was a teacher, actually. And she worked in a school for autistic children. And she wrote me a letter, and I think I still have it. And she said, we have this one young boy, and I think he was maybe 5 or 6. And she said, he has never spoken. And he was walking through the day room when you were doing the courtroom scene. And he looked at the television, he pointed at it, and he said, cry. And she said, we knew that there was hope for him and that he understood what we had been trying to talk to him and teach him. So that was
a powerful moment.
like that, like that. So those are the things that really, all of a sudden I saw that what I had been talking about, thinking about, wanting, longing for, was a way to create a character, give a performance that would actually give away what this work that we do is about. Because I think we're in a service business, and I've said that for the longest time. Like that.
You were actually recognized by your peers as well. You won 2 daytime Emmys for that role,
Yes,
back
I
to back.
I did.
What was that like for you?
Well, the first one was kind of amazing because Sammy Davis Jr. had been on the show. And we were out, it wasn't televised at the time, and we were in Rockefeller Plaza, you know where the skating rink is? And Sammy was there, and he and I had done scenes together, and we had a very special connection. And he had always watched One Life to Live and loved me on it, and so we were really like bonded. And one of the first scenes he ever did was in this bar, the River Rat, where he comes up to me, and I've got to see if I can find that scene because he was genius. His work on that show was just, he was remarkable, extraordinary person. And he runs up behind me before they were announcing the award, and he holds on to me and he whispers in my ear, he says, you're gonna win. So that was really special, and then I did. And then the second time, I wasn't gonna win, that wasn't gonna happen, and I did. And by that time, I think it was televised. I don't remember what hotel we were in, but it was shocking, really. I so didn't expect it. And then I met my husband, Robert Desiderio, on One Life to Live. And as the storylines were changing, and I was doing other things on the show, and he had been in California, and he was doing a lot of work in California, and he was an actor at the time, and he had done he did a movie of the week with Valerie Bertinelli, and then he had done another pilot for Universal, fabulous pilot called Moonlight. And he said to me, you know you have to leave. I said, no, I don't. I don't have to leave. And I said, I don't want to leave New York. I don't want to go to California. I don't drive. I like the seasons. I don't want to sit and look at the sun and orange trees and lemon trees for the rest of my life. I said, why do you think we have to go? And by now, I was working a lot with Herb. And by now, Herb had met his partner, Jonathan Stoller. And they backed up Robert and said, yes, it's time for you to go. And I will never forget the day. I was in Joe Stewart's office, the producer, and I signed my leaving, the contract that I said I would go, that I wouldn't re-up. And I thought, what am I doing? This is insanity. And I knew I had a lot of support. And I went to California with nothing. I mean, I had saved my money because my agents at the time, Clifford Stevens and Tex Bea at STE, said, look, when I got the soap opera, Clifford said to me, don't tell me in 5 years when you're ready to leave the soap that you have no money. He said, we're not doing that. You're going to save your money. So I had saved money. So I went with some money, but I didn't have a job. I'm not so great without a job. I mean, I've learned how to be better over the years because there have been periods of time where I haven't been working, but they said, okay, time to go. And I'm like, okay. And I went there, and the first thing I got was this movie of the week with Anthony Geary and Robert Vaughn and a bunch of other people. And it was called Intimate Agony, the herpes story. Stop laughing. Stop it. All of you in the room, stop laughing. I mean, it was just like, and I was terrible in it. I'm just awful in it. I mean, it's just, I'm just awful. And then I got another job called You Are the Jury, which I'm also awful in. And then I started auditioning for all these pilots and stuff, and I wasn't getting anything. I got this one job, and then they called and said, oh, whoops, we made a mistake. We meant to call somebody else.
Oh, no.
They took it away from me. I was like, are you kidding me? So all of this time, remember that thing I was talking to you about I surrender, tell me what you want me to do? I'm back at the same old place. I cycled back around again. I'm like, hey, I want this. I want this now. I want it this way. And Herb lovingly said to me, I think you're back to the same place you were before you got One Life to Live. And I said, why am I not getting these auditions? I don't understand why I'm not getting these jobs. I don't understand. He said, do you see how angry you are? He said, well, people feel your energy. He said, when you walk into a room and you're so angry, they feel it. And they go, ew, we don't want to work with this girl. So I said, I'm not angry. Really? He said, I rest my case. So I really looked at that, and I really worked on that. And then I got this job on St. Elsewhere of playing a pregnant woman who has come into the operating room. She's pregnant for, I don't even remember how many.
She had 8 kids already.
Was it like 8 kids?
Like that,
Oh,
yeah.
I love that you know this. Thank you so much. You are my memory. And correct me if I get any of this wrong. And she was upset with the doctors because they hadn't done a proper vasectomy on her husband, but apparently he hadn't gone to get the vasectomy, and he told her that he had. And all of a sudden I was operating at a different level. My energy was different, and I got the job. And I loved it, and it was just great, and I got to work with all these fabulous people. Even though it was just this one day. And then I started getting these other jobs, these, guest spots. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, okay, like Birmingham Steele and Pierce Brosnan and Stephanie Zimbalist and, like St. Elsewhere was Ed Begley Jr. and, just like really lovely people. And I did a couple of others too, which I can't remember now, which you probably have.
You did a Family Ties.
I did Family Ties, and I just loved it. I loved it. It was so great. And I got to work with Michael, and, all of them on the show were just so great and great to me. And I said, you can be a great person and be in this business in a way that's different and not so abrasive and demanding. And just all this time just talking with Herb and Jonathan and Robert about where I'm coming from instead of where I thought I needed to go. Some of the things you were talking about before that I learned from my parents. I mean, my mother's like this, we're going. This is how you get there. And it's like, not necessarily. I don't have to do it like that. And then I got this script for a thing called You're the Boss. And I read it, and I loved it. And this was the mid-season pilot season that I was getting a couple of scripts from ABC. And I got this other one called Command 5, and I got another one called Staff of Life. So I went up for all of them. And they were all interested in me. But when I went in for You're the Boss, I went in with this new place that I was coming from. And I met Marty Cohen and Blake Hunter, and I did one scene for them. And then I read another scene for them. And they said, thanks. And I said, I love this. Can I read another scene? And I ended up reading all these scenes for them in the pilot.
What did you love about it?
I loved the story. I loved, and remember, this was the early 80s. This was a flip. This was a woman who was a powerhouse in her job and out there in the working world in advertising in New York City and absolutely inept at home, but willing to hire somebody that her mother thought was a good idea, and a man who was strong and sensitive and vulnerable and could actually teach her something. And I thought, that's a powerful story. And to this day, I have young women come up to me and say, it was Angela Bauer that changed my life about what I could do in the world as a woman. Mm-hmm. One of the first most powerful feminists. And I said, I love the humor of it. I love the relationship with the children. I love the relationship with her mother. I loved the potential for the relationship with this man, that it was about two people who cared about each other, not what their jobs were. And that this was a man who was sensitive enough and enough of his own person to know that he could do this and that he was supporting someone and a family and taking care of his own family. I mean, the levels were multiple. And of course it became Who's the Boss? And everybody writes me still all the time and says, so who was the boss? And the answer I always give is, that was the beauty of the show. You never knew from week to week. There was always a chance that could have been little Jonathan. But somebody was always the person who was being put forward as the person who knew something, had an answer, was there to be there for somebody else. And so, story. I mean, I wasn't thinking terribly well about how to orchestrate a career. And one of the things that Herb said to me in the very beginning was, he said, listen, you have to look at yourself like you are a commodity, like you are a bottle of ketchup. Because if you don't, you're going to get all your emotions all tangled up with all of this, which is what I had been doing. And he said, think of yourself like that. Think of yourself in a different way, so that you can remove all the emotional stuff from it, so that you can be on target with where you are going, so that you can be listening to the messages that are being sent to you. So I said, okay, now that I have these 3 opportunities at the network, how do I want to place those opportunities? Because you went up to the network to do your final audition for them if they were interested in you. So Command 5 was number 3. You're the Boss was number 2. And Staff of Life was number 1. Have you ever heard of Staff of Life?
I have not.
Okay, you have not. Okay. Well, it was about soap opera writers, and I thought maybe that was why I should be looking at it. And it was very well written, and this brilliant director, Jay Sandrich, was directing it, and it was like, oh, this is interesting. So I said, okay, Staff of Life in first place. I go up to the network. Of course, I'm a nervous wreck. I go up, I audition for it, I'm finished, and then they say, You're the Boss wants you to audition with Tony Danza on camera. So it wasn't just going to the network. They were going to take this tape to the network. Now, I said to Herb, nah, I don't need to go up for this. And Herb said, what are you talking about? I said, well, I went up for Staff of Life. He said, what are you doing? He said, you're not going up for it because you're terrified. And of course, in my inimitable fashion, I said, no, I'm not terrified. I said, okay, yes, I am terrified. He said, get your gear together and go in for the audition. Now, of course, the brilliant Bill Persky is directing this. I go in. I do this audition. You can even find this audition. It's out there floating around somewhere. I bet you have it, right? Of course you do. Look at you. I go in. I meet Tony. We do the audition together. It's magic. I love it so much. Bill Persky is so supportive. Tony is so supportive. We have this moment in there that wasn't written in, that people have talked about when they've seen this audition tape, where he knocks on my door in the middle of the night. I come out, I'm in my nightgown and robe, and of course there's a lot of chemistry. And I say to him something about, I don't want to stand here in my doorway talking to you. I cross over in front of him to go in to sit down in the hall. There's a bench in the hall. And I know him. I mean, I know. And I just turned around at one point in the audition. I said, what are you looking at? As I crossed in front of him. And Persky says that's when he knew that there was the magic. And we finished. I left and I said, oh my. And I called Herb and I said, I think I made a really bad mistake. I put Staff of Life first and this is the one I really want to do. And he said, well, there's nothing to do except allow for divine choreography. And I said, I don't know if I have the patience for that. He said, no, you have to let it unfold. Well, unbeknownst to me, of course, because all these projects are at ABC, they know who they want for what. And they were clear that once they saw the tape, they said, that's the pairing. That's what we have to do. So as I said, it was made for mid-season. We shot it in September of 1983. And it was supposed to go and possibly be picked up for January for their mid-season replacements. Well, they saw the tape and they tested it. I mean, they saw the pilot once we finished it. They tested it and it tested off the charts. I mean, it was like over the moon. ABC, very smart, said, okay, we're going to hold this and put it in with our pilots that we're making for the fall. They put it in for the fall. It goes on the air on Thursday nights opposite the Cosby lineup. Not so good. We're floundering. We're all over the place. They come to us. They say, we're going to take you off the air, find another place for you and put you back on. Now, this is the first pilot I've ever made. So I'm like, hey, guys, this is great. They're going to find a new place for us. Now, really, and everybody turned to me and said, you're an idiot. When they take you off the air, that means they take you off the air. They're not putting us back on the air. And I said, no, they said they're going to put us back on the air. Oh, this is the way it went for a while. They did, in fact, put us back on the air. They moved us around a lot of different slots. Then they reran us during that summer. And we came back a bona fide hit. And we were in the top 10, I think, for the next 7 years. And we did 8 seasons, maybe 6 years. We slipped a little, but we launched so many shows in that 8 o'clock slot that they put us in that we were the go-to position for all these other things that launched off of Who's the Boss. And then after 8 years, they said, okay, time to go.
Let's talk about some of those 8 years a little bit.
Okay.
Especially because your background had been in daytime. How did, shooting for a sitcom compare to what you were used to?
Well, you know how people are, they tend to lock you in. And a lot of people said, excuse me, this girl has only done theater and a soap opera, and we're going to give her the lead in a comedy opposite Tony Danza, who has been on Taxi and it's like, Mr. Comedy. I learned what I learned about comedy from Tony Danza. He taught me so much about timing. And so, they got to know that over time I could be funny and that my timing was good and all of that. But they're very different mediums. A soap opera is very intense. I mean, you are working, and if you have a big storyline like I did, you're memorizing 60 pages of dialogue a day. Because I didn't know how to use the teleprompter. I could only use the teleprompter if I had a phone call. I would pray for a phone call in the soap so that I didn't have to memorize it. And the drama and the having to have the ability to be truthful in a moment, in a second on the soap, so that it doesn't come across as fake and inauthentic, was very arduous and a big challenge. And you had to do it quickly, and you had to do it every day. I mean, we were wrung out at the end of the week. It was really exhausting. And it is some of the best training that I have ever had. I would recommend it to everybody, that when you're starting out, do a soap opera. It will train you in so many different things, and you have to be really careful that you don't get into bad habits. And that was something that happened to me. I had to be really careful. I had to unwind myself in a way. But I had this wonderful director, some great directors on there, Norman Hall, David Pressman, Peter Miner. And I said to Peter one day, I said, I don't know how to do this. Tell me how to do this. He said, just think of it like it's a theater performance. First rehearsal, first reading is first reading. First rehearsal, dress rehearsal, go to camera, it's opening night. So that was how I did it. That was how I moved myself through the process of that. Sitcom, altogether different. I mean, you have a whole different, you work up to the end of the week. So we started on Monday, we read the script, we left, the writers went to work. So at a table read, you really had to give them something. You had to really work to make the jokes work, the story work, so that they weren't going to go back into the writer's room and sit there for hours seeing if something worked. You had to let them know that there were things that they had that were already fine and they didn't have to touch, they didn't have to deal with. But there were other bigger things that they really had to address.
Was there room for input if you wanted to make some changes?
Oh my God, we had a team of people that were always open to input. And mind you, Tony was really our leader. Tony was our Moses. I mean, he really because of him and the way he really took us to the promised land. Tony was working with Blake and Marty. He was working with all of the writers, and we would say things, or we would try things in rehearsal, and we would see that it would fall flat. So Tuesday we would come back, they would give us a new script, we would read it, then we would go to work and we would block it. And we had a wonderful director we had lots of different directors through the first year, and then we settled on a wonderful director who had been trained at Yale Drama School, whose name was Assad Kalata. And Assad really got in there and helped us formulate things. And Tony, I don't think, knew fully what an extraordinary actor he had the ability to be. And I remember we shot this one show. His father had died. And there was a scene about how he takes Angela into Brooklyn to clean up the apartment. And it wasn't just a funny episode. It was an episode that was filled with complexity and drama. But Assad worked with us to make it a combination of both. And I do think that was the moment. And I think that was maybe in the first season, or maybe in the beginning of the second season, where Tony knew what a great actor he actually was. That there was somewhere where I gave him the piece of the drama and he gave me the comedy. And I think that was how our chemistry fed on each other. I think that's why people loved seeing us and seeing us all together, and that there was chemistry among all of us on that show. But Tony was really the leader, and so yes, we had input. So Tuesday we would do, at the end of the day, the producers would come in and we would do what we had rehearsed for them, and then they would see it, and then we would come back in on Wednesday. And then on Wednesday, we would do a run-through for them in the morning. But before we would start rehearsal that day, Tony had everybody sit down, and we were not allowed to have trades on the set. He didn't want us to be talking about the business. So we did current events. Now, Tony read every newspaper. And he would talk, particularly with the kids. He didn't want them to just be show business kids. He said, we're going to have current events. So we all sat around in the morning and had our coffee while Tony led us in a teaching session, because Tony's a teacher, of current events. It was remarkable. Then we would do the run-through. And of course, we had to memorize each new script so that we would be off book as much as we could be. We weren't always, but as much as we could be, to give the producers a sense of what was going to happen. Well, then at lunchtime, Tony brought in his friend Pat Rico, who taught tap, and we took tap dancing lessons. Now, as you are probably well aware, Tony is the only one who kept it up. But it was amazing. And then he started taking piano lessons, and then he started doing all these, playing the ukulele. And all of this he is put into his show, Honeymoon in Vegas, here in New York now. But he was devoted. And so then we would leave, and then Thursday we would come in early, and we would block with the cameras. Then we would do a run-through at the end of the day. They would see what worked. Then Friday we'd come in, get hair and makeup. Then we would do one show at 3:30, drop the cameras, get notes, have dinner, get makeup and hair touch-ups. 6 o'clock, we would come back in with some new lines, new jokes, and the way Tony wanted to do this, we did it like a play. It was like a one act every week. So it was like being in the theater. And so he didn't want to keep the audience waiting. Now, I'm sure you know that lots of other sitcoms would go until 11 o'clock at night, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And none of us thought that anybody was any funnier at 2 o'clock in the morning. And so, and if you see Who's the Boss, you'll see the makeup and hair changes that I have in all these different scenes, and wardrobe changes. And Tony said to me, Ju, you gotta be really fast. So that team of makeup, hair, and wardrobe could get me dressed, and we had one scene where I went from wet to dry in 3 minutes.
Wow.
It was amazing, but it was because of his leadership, and he didn't want the audience waiting. He said, we'll lose their energy, and we would be done normally at about 7 or 7:30. They mixed the two shows together. They took the best of both shows, but Tony always prided himself on the fact that he could get home in time to see Jeopardy at 7:30. And that was the way we shot Who's the Boss for 8 years. Well, actually, the first year we didn't operate like that, but the second year, that's the way it was, and that was the way that he wanted to do it. And he felt that it was really important that we not leave people hanging and waiting. I mean, going to see a live sitcom can be exhausting for the audience. Everybody says, oh, this is fabulous. And then they get there and they're like, oh my God, when is this going to be over? But you need the synergy and the energy. It's just like being in the theater.
All right, so we're going to take a short break there, and then we'll pick up with talking about the cast.
Okay,
All right.
good.
Thank you.